And it's not something that suits a whole lot of people, but it suits that engineering planning background.
Yeah.
And then of course the main thing then is the play with the fabrics, and nothing is sewn in the way that I do it. Nothing is sewn until all the fabrics are pinned up on the design wall.
Interesting.
I've tried to do it to shortcut, but the pieces only work in context, and so if you were trying to get a sense of depth, or if you're trying to distinguish what's part of a leaf versus part of the background, where the light is falling on the subject, what should be light, what should be in shadow, what should be coming forward, what should be retreating, all of those kinds of considerations. You have to put the fabrics up and see if it's working, and be prepared to change them out if it's not. And if you go into sewing it, then you're tempted to leave it.
That's really interesting. Are you using? It looks like you use a lot of batiks. Do you use all kinds of? Do you have? I imagine you have like palette. Like you have the fabric is your palette. So what does your workspace look like in terms of being able to pick out fabrics for what you're doing?
Well, I have I have boxes and boxes of fabric. Actually, most of them are fairly shallow containers. I mostly buy fat quarters because I want a lot of fabric. I don't use very much of any one, and they're sorted by color. And I have closets full of them.
So when you say
I buy every green I ever come across.
So like the greens, when you have like boxes of, do you have like a number of boxes of greens or just a green box? Yes. No, I've got a number of boxes of greens. So that you can that would make sense.
In fact, in the greens, I've got very, big, tall boxes that are like the kind of thing that you store files in, that sort of size. And with those, then, I'm sorting into blue greens, gray greens, yellow greens, and deciding which are the ones that are appropriate. And then every surface in the room will be covered with fabric if I'm working on something.
That's really awesome.
It's my room, so I can do what I want in it.
Totally. That is the beauty of it. Your stuff is really, I'm looking at, is it hollyhock?
Yes.
And it's just beautiful. I mean, they're all when you look at the detail, it's amazing. Now, how long does it take you from going from idea to finished quilt? Average, just an average sense, just so people understand.
I really don't know.
Do you work on more than one at a time?
Usually work. I might have one at the design stage when one's in the, on the wall or being sewn. In case I get stuck. But more usually one at a time. I did the triptych with the three quilts, and those I did them one at a time, but I designed them as to work together, and certainly it was important to use the fabrics so that they related. So I created the background to look as though there was some continuous lines going from one to the other.
That's really cool.
So they could be, but that was done for a particular situation. A barrister friend in Australia had moved into a new set of chambers, and she inherited a red wall, and so she wanted something to go on the red wall. So
that's cool.
Of course,
well, it's really beautiful.
You know, there are many reds. So the way that worked, and we're back to my engineering orientation, is I went to the paint store and I picked up 2 copies of every single paint sample chart that they had, anything that could conceivably be called red. So, purple reds, brown reds, orange reds, all the different reds. And I kept one set for myself and sent one set to her and said, tell me which chip is the closest to your wall color.
That is very clever. Oh my goodness.
And then figured out what could go against that background. Because I also, instead of making a large quilt, I said, you might move again. And so with the triptychs, you can split them up.
That's really smart. Yeah.
That's me thinking about my huge Ruth McDowell quilt,
Indeed,
which one time.
Right.
We moved into Manhattan where they're not big on cathedral ceilings. So the quilt actually went to my husband's office in North Carolina for a while until we moved up here and I got a cathedral ceiling again.
Interesting. That's very funny. Is it like paper piecing? Like all of these lines are so... These are like very intricate and are they raw? They're not raw edges, right? They are raw edges?
No. It's all pieced.
It's all pieced. So how are you... Mm-hmm. That's your engineering head, right? That's impossible. These are really intricate. Is it like paper piecing? Are you using paper piecing techniques on it? Or you got a whole different thing?
Basically, that's where the plan comes into place, where you have drawn it in such a way that you can say, okay, I'm in section 1, and I'm going to put piece A to piece B. Then we can attach C to the combined A and B, and so on and so forth. So you're basically so that. It has to be sewn in the right order.
Yeah.
And so what the guidance is the use of the freezer paper that has a complete copy of the whole thing with all the registration marks on. Yeah. And so basically, if you can imagine my design wall, I've got the master template on the wall. I've got on top of it, I've got the freezer paper. And so then as I want to work in an area, I will cut out the sections of freezer paper, put it on fabric, pin the fabric back on the wall, and keep doing that until I'm satisfied. But the freezer paper is a template. It's if I'm doing straight edge piecing, then the fabric doesn't have to be cut absolutely precisely, because I can use the edge of the freezer paper as the guide for the seam line. Yeah. If I'm doing curved piecing, then I have to cut very careful 1/4-inch seam allowances around the templates. Wow. Because you have to take the template off in order to sew.
Right.
So, in fact, in those cases, I would actually draw around, use a colored pencil to draw around the template on the fabric. So a much slower process for the sewing together. As I say, it's faster to draw, but it's slower to sew.
And how do you decide on the quilting parts of it? The quilting is also super intricate. So
yes, it's that's all free motion. Mm-hmm. I love hand quilting. I absolutely love hand quilting, but you really can't hand quilt when you have got all of these seam allowances. 1 or 2 of them I had space, and I did do a lot of hand quilting. because I love doing it, but mostly it has to be machine quilted. And usually it depends. I'm usually trying to imitate something about the texture of the subject material. So obviously, if in many cases I would be putting in veins on a leaf using the quilting, or I would be using quilting in a way to make parts of it recede and parts of it puff up a little bit, tiny amount, to give that context of and others it's shading.
Really pretty. I'm still looking at the same one, Hollyhock, as you talk, and it's just the detail is so beautiful and so, oh my goodness, it's really precise. It's just remarkable. What about the back? What does the back look like? What kind of fabric do you use?
Usually on the back, I've used decorative fabric.
Oh,
the reason for that is using something that would be used for furnishings, drapes, whatever. That fabric is very tightly woven.
Yeah.
And will tend to hold its shape. You can't stretch it usually. I mean, at least I select fabrics like that.
Yeah.
That have got a tight weave and that don't have any give in them. And what that does is help to keep the quilt square. Because as you have put in all of these hundreds of seam lines, all these bits and pieces, it's very easy to pull out of shape. And then when you start quilting it, the quilting can pull things out of shape. So that very tight weave backing fabric is good as a stabilizer.
And
it helps things.
So are you using a particular kind of batting, and are you quilting through that back as well?
Yes, you're quilting from that. You've made the sandwich of the backing fabric, then the batting, and then the piece top, and the batting I would usually use either a cotton or a wool, not a polyester.
Interesting.
And I'm using one that's fairly thin. There are ones that are really good for machine quilting.
Yeah.
And you're not making a fluffy bed covering, so you don't want it to have a lot of depth to it.
Right. Interesting. And then are you framing them? This one has a black binding. It looks like a black or blue binding. Are you doing the same binding on each, or are you just does it depend on what you're doing, or is the binding fairly standard on your quilts?
No, it totally depends on the quilt. I think I've only used the facing method once, and I'm not sure that the buyer of that quilt was entirely glad that I did it that way. Sometimes I am basically incorporating the edging of the quilt into the design. So if you can see one, I haven't got my site open. Let me just have a look.
Cool. And your site is, just so that we have it on the recording, is www.pj-quilts.com, right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, this is really pretty stuff.
So if I look at, Which one is it? Okay.